Hi, I'm Joel.
Hi, I'm Zoe.
I think I might have cut myself off. Hi, I'm Joel.
Hi, I'm Zoe.
Welcome to episode 3.
Woo!
You're still here.
Came back. You know what they say, keep coming back.
Blink 5 times if you're in trouble.
Being held hostage.
So last time you said, hey, why don't you actually teach me some shit instead of just
Thrown me in the water.
winging it every time. I don't know. Don't you like winging it?
No. We were just talking about anxiety. That's like my number one anxiety inducer.
Oh, I didn't know.
Hmm.
I'm a winger.
Yeah.
Just
Just
see what happens.
well, I think you can wing it when you know what you're doing. I mean, like when you know the material that you're going to be utilizing, or it's easier to just wing it than when you have no idea. You don't even know if there's an undo button and there's
It's clear to me from this conversation you've never been a consultant.
that's a fact. That is 100% accurate.
Because you don't, in fact, have to know what you're talking about.
Well, you know.
There's a saying in consulting that you just have to be like one day ahead of whatever the customer knows. Then you're
Right.
fine.
You would just have to seem like you know what you're talking about.
Well, I'm going to share my screen and try to teach you the ways of the force.
Let's.
So, yeah, let's go.
So we're just going to be going over basics today.
Yep, just want to show you the ropes of Power BI, try to narrow it down from 183 buttons to the 10 buttons that you actually care about.
What you actually
need.
need.
Really is, there is a lot of stuff going on and
yeah,
you don't need it all. So I think that's some of the questions you were asking the first time around made me realize, okay, we can narrow this down, kind of show you the parts and pieces, how it all flows together. So
right. Yeah.
All right. So let me share desktop.
Sharing is caring. So I've heard.
So I wanted to start. You had mentioned the first time the troubles with finding data, and I agree. And like coming up with your own data is hard. And so one of the things that I was exploring was this website called Data.World.
Oh.
And they have just a bunch of free data sets that are published by other people. And, you can just Google Data.World. I'd Google Data.World COVID, for example. And they had they had a list of, I don't know how many COVID data sets. So I picked the first one. And you can see this is put out by the Associated Press. So it's like real actual data. I think it's something we'll both understand. It's kind of morbid to talk about, but I think it's on a lot of people's minds. So it's kind of relevant as well to, and how you might want to visualize things in Power BI.
Okay.
So I'll put a link down below in the description. There's an article about how to connect to a Data.World data set, but signing up is free. Connecting is pretty easy.
Okay.
I'm not going to go through, I've already done it in Power BI, so I'm not going to go through like all of those steps. I'm just going to link to the article. So through that magic, I will kind of mention one thing on the Power BI side, and that's this under get data, which you did before in the other episode, I think you were using CSV and trying out some things with Excel. So I go down here to more and then type Data.World. Then it's got this connector.
Really? Huh.
So when you connect in here,
wow.
Yeah, blah, blah, blah. You basically have to provide it the name of the owner, which the one that I was showing you was Associated Press, and then the data set ID, which was, I don't know, COVID dash something, something. And then you say, okay, you sign in, put your credentials. Like I said, I'll do the link to all that and it'll explain things. So once you do that and select your tables, which is, you got this far before with your 3 tables. But now I'm going to take you somewhere that I don't think you made it to the first time around.
Okay.
Which is almost always like kind of the first place I go into when I'm doing a data set. So the get data would be the first step. And this would be the second step, which is this transform data button. And this is actually going to open a whole other program. Basically,
new world.
A whole new life of Power Query.
You can do anything, see anything. Disney, don't come after us. We're just a couple of nerds.
It probably will, because it was so exact.
It was spot on. So this kind of looks like that tab that I showed you that you didn't know.
It does look that way. That tab,
whole new thing.
I cut out the part from the last episode about me not knowing something, just so you know.
Okay.
So
well, that's why I wanted to drop it in here. So I'm just going to keep saying it.
Remember the time you didn't know?
I knew something that you didn't. Consultant.
I'm going to cut this out too. The power of editing. So
anyway,
this is Power Query, which you can also use inside of Excel. I have never really used it in Excel, but
I've seen the button.
It exists there. But this is for manipulating data in different ways. What would be like a very simple thing, a very similar example of Excel would be like doing text to columns.
Okay.
And in fact, we could do that if we wanted to, because we have this county name long that has 3 columns. I could potentially put them into 3 different columns. Not necessarily what I was going to show today, but that would be, an example of what you could do in here. I've got date times. I could reformat the date times to just be dates. I could, change a format from a string to a number. I could, what else could I do here? I could say if this is a certain value, then put a different value in another column, or respell the value, or do some kind of like lookup type transformation. So it's like all those different types of data transformations is what is happening in this screen. So as you start to see across the top, you can start to see some of those transformations, like removing columns, removing rows, those kind of things. So let me so the most common types of transformations that I do in here, one is the choose columns. I'm just going to show there's a button here that has a lot of useful functions on it in this grid. So choose columns, that would be a common one that I use. Like, okay, I don't want, whatever. I don't want to know
latitude and longitude.
Yeah, sure. So now those have disappeared from my data set. You can see across to the right, when I start
Ah.
manipulating it, it starts like putting in step by step all the manipulations I've done. So you can actually go backwards. Like if I click back here on navigation, the fields come back because it'll
You can
sort of like
track changes.
unrun the step. So I can have like, a dozen different steps or as many steps as I want, and everything's kind of additive, right? It's like step by step, I'm slowly transforming my data set to do more and more things. So if you go across the top, I mean, you can see there's more transformation functions. Yeah, I'm not going to get into all of those today because I don't think it's necessary. But I wanted to do a couple things in here. So one common type of transformation that you can do in here is adding a column. So that's like in Excel, if you have a quantity and a price and you want to multiply those two numbers on every row, that's what you can do. You can basically do a function in here. So I could say, for example, give me cumulative cases divided by population, right? Cases per population. I can give it a name, say, okay. Now it's going to tell me I added this column, and there it is.
So what's with all the nulls?
Null is basically just means zero. It's slightly different than zero. Zero can be like an answer to something sometimes, and null is just like I have no information.
Like NA almost?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I want to show one other thing. This is actually a little bit more advanced than I want to get into, but it's going to help us in a future step. The main thing I want to show you is kind of like choosing columns, the fact that there's all these transformation options, and the custom column. Like those are the main things that I use most of the time. So I'm going to do a thing where I reference this table, and I am just going to keep this state column. So I'm going to say choose columns, just states. And then I'm going to run one other function that says remove duplicates. And I just got myself a list of states. This is important for a future step. It doesn't totally make sense right now why I got a list of states, but so I'm going to name the states. And that's all I really wanted to show you in Power Query. So I'm going to pause and just see like if this kind of experience is making sense and if you have questions about what we're doing.
So, okay, so how is this then translated back into Power BI?
Yeah, that's the next step. So those tables on the right side of Power BI, we're about to hit.
Are these?
Yes. These queries, we've just manipulated the data. And then we're going to send that data back to Power BI. So you'll see when we go back, we're going to have 4 tables instead of 3 because now we have this table called states that didn't exist before.
From Power BI, you open query and you can manipulate the data that's then used to make your visualizations back in Power BI.
Yes. So let's close and apply. And this may take a minute. Let's see. Yeah, so this is actually this is going back, reloading the data and reloading all those transformations that we did. So now you can see we've got our 3 tables plus the new states table that we introduced. The next thing I want to talk about that's very important in Power BI is how you can relate these tables together. So I'm going to do a table visual. And I'm going to throw in our states. Okay, so when we brought in this data, we get some pretty weird looking numbers, right? In fact, if I sorted this by state, well, you can see it's like adding up the same number. It's just repeating over and over and over again for every state, right? Which is doesn't make any sense. It's obviously wrong.
Right.
And that's where it's important to have these relationships. So states isn't related to table 2 or table 3. And therefore, Power BI doesn't know how the numbers are supposed to relate to each state. So it's kind of just spitting out the total because there is no relationship between these two tables. So that's why defining the relationships is important. You come into this manage relationships and you say, all right, for table 2 and for this state field, we're going to relate that to the states table.
Oh, okay.
And then for table 3, for the state field, we're also going to relate this to the states table. Say, okay, now when I apply these changes, now my report's going to start to make a lot more sense because now there is a relationship between these two tables and the state. And, now it's giving me the numbers by state.
Makes sense.
So the next question you had was like, okay, there's like 20 of these visualizations. Don't care. And I'm with you on the don't care. There's about, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 of these that I think are the most useful visualizations. So like all of these graph visuals for the first 3 rows, basically, they're just different versions of
the same thing.
The same concept. Yeah. I mean, but
right.
Probably the most common thing people use is like a bar chart. If I click out of the visual and then click it, it gives me something brand new.
Right.
So now we can do I see this thing that says new cases 7-day rolling average. So let's try that. And there's a date column in here. Let's try that.
Ugh. So what'd you just do?
I changed this. This is a little more advanced. It does these date hierarchies, which I don't like. I just wanted the date column itself. So I clicked, there's like a drop down on the field where you can do some settings, and I just switched it from the hierarchy to the date column.
Okay.
So you can see this looks like, yeah, well, it looks depressing, but it looks like the graphs from Google or whatever. The next visual that I find really useful and very common is this thing called a slicer. And the slicer concept basically says I could put in something like, states as an obvious example. And I'm just going to try to get that to the top. There's a little setting over here that I always change to drop down just to kind of save space. But this is basically going to let me do a filter. on the report. So you can select Indiana and see how they're doing. And so you can see when I selected that, it updated this graph and it updated this other table because it's related, the state is related there.
So how does it know to change the graph? Appears like it's a separate visual. So how does one visual, is it because of the relationships that you inputted?
Yes, exactly. I mean, the number, like a page in Power BI always relates to everything else on that page. So just as an example,
Okay.
another way I could do the same thing is even if I have my slicer set to all, but I click on Colorado, where I am right now, it'll do kind of a different kind of filter, but it'll show like how is Colorado doing, actually showing it as a percentage of the whole United States. So it's a little bit different view. But like that's how Power BI kind of interacts. Like it'll let you click on things in the visual and then it'll update other things. Or as another example, since this is a bar chart and it's filtered by days, if I click on one specific day, there we go. It actually updated this.
That's cool.
So we got a bar chart, a slicer. I already did the table. The table's got to be the most common of anything because, it's just kind of like exploring the data.
Right.
The one next to it is almost identical. So you have the matrix visual is like a pivot table instead of a table. So that gives you some like drill down capabilities. So for example, I could put state, and I think this data set had some kind of location type. Yeah, okay. And we'll do confirmed. Right, so now I have like a pivot table that I can drill down into that says, here's the cases in large metro areas. And now I could drill into that state. I could add county in here to drill down further. Right, so there's different ways, this should look more like what a pivot table looks like. Very
And
common.
when you mean drill down, that means
Yeah,
being
just
able to
like,
see. Okay.
well, just like clicking on this plus, because I put two attributes in here. I put this like urbanization classification, and I put the state. So that means in my visual, here, let me hit this button. I can like sort of pop it out and see it bigger.
Okay.
That means in my visual now, I can see it by this, but then I can see the breakdown of that.
So would that change if you switch those two, then it would list state and then have the drill down would be the each. Okay. Got it. Okay.
These are the most common things I use: a slicer, a data table, a pivot table. It's called a matrix visual in here. Some kind of bar or line graph, and this like card visual.
Cool.
The last thing I wanted to kind of show you the ropes on is some settings to make this stuff prettier. Part of it can be done over here in the values, right? I can just double click in the value and type in, what was this? State level cases, county level cases, right? So now it's updating my fields over here. But this paintbrush is where all the fun formatting stuff is. So the search is useful because, if you're kind of getting started, you can say, okay, well, let's do text size and change it to 11 instead of 10. And now my text is going to grow. I mean, a lot of this is just sort of good. Like every visual sort of has similar settings, but there's some nuance between them. You know, like this. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there a way to, like, with that, the state list, is there a way to make it like see all text so like you don't have to scroll?
A lot of times with Power BI, you're trying to like give more summarized information. So if you have a list of 50 things, like you'd probably want to say, well, can I build a dashboard where somebody selects, you know, Alabama, and then I'm showing them the details of Alabama. There's different tools if you want like to print out a paginated report where things need to go on many pages. That's not like, it's not even what Power BI is for.
Yeah. I was
Use
just
Excel
curious.
if you, no, it's a good question,
Yeah.
but it's like, that's where it becomes important because, you know, Excel is way better at, you know, printing a 2-page report. Power BI is better at summarizing the data and putting it next to graphs and that kind of stuff. One thing is like on these numbers, you know, these are cases, and I don't really need 2 decimal places on the cases, right? So that's one of the things, actually, when I click on that field, you can see it gives me some tools to sort of reformat. So that's another thing I can do is, you know, click the column format or the comma format and change the decimals to 0.
Where's American Samoa? Where is that? Is that? Oh, look. Is it like a Pacific island?
Yeah.
Huh.
Is there a non-American Samoa? Yeah, there is. It's like got one piece of Samoa.
Well, we really wanted something. Interesting.
Do they have cases there?
Nope.
Oh.
Probably because there's like nobody there.
We should go.
Christmas 2021.
Can you? They probably don't want our COVID
Or us in
infection.
general.
I mentioned math that you could do, like we did cases per population, but so that was like row level math, but you can do math like across your whole data set. So I'll give a good example of that, but let me just show you how to do it. First is you can right click and say new measure. And this is basically going to look like writing Excel functions. Average new cases per population. And then we can do some Excel style formulas, right? So I can do sum of a field, new cases. Divided by average of, and I'm going to pick the population. And so now we can see, we can pull that in by state.
Infinity.
And
The limit does not exist.
there's a fix for that. They didn't have any population data for Guam, so I think. or something like that. Maybe that's, yeah, anyways.
Non. Sorry.
Now I'm hungry for Indian food.
I know.
Yeah, so anyways,
So what's the population though? Like how do you,
well, that was
it's different. Each population is different. Why is that column important?
like New York has a lot more population than Wyoming. So
Okay,
if you
so
just
it's
look at total
comparing it to
cases,
itself.
yeah, if you just look at
Okay.
total cases, it may not make as much sense as if you compare it to the overall population. No, I think this is right. So this is telling me that I got to do it in a percentage. So this is saying that Alabama has had 5% of the population has gotten COVID.
And died.
No,
No.
I mean, we could do that with a
Oh,
similar
okay. I was
formula.
misreading the syntax thing. Okay.
The cool thing in Power BI is I can take this function. So I did it by state, right? But I could take this same formula and I'm going to just change my graph here. So let's see what happens when I put this into, yeah, so now it's giving me what percentage of the population has gotten COVID every day, I guess. No, I don't know. It's
But there's
I didn't
no.
totally think through like the exact math of my calculation, so I'm like confusing myself. The point is,
But it doesn't give you per where it's at.
yeah, I mean that's sort of same. Like I can write one calculation, but then I can sort of slice and dice it different ways in my report.
Right. Okay. Okay.
So I can slice it by state. I can slice it over time. You know, I could group this by month and kind of see it at a month level, how it's trending. So like I can do a bunch of different things, you know, with only one function, which is way different than Excel. Like Excel, you're always like writing this function sort of one at a time. And you'd have,
Yes.
like in this case, I'd have to write two different functions and basically have to have two different data sets. But in Power BI, I can do these calculations and then represent them and display them in different ways.
Cool.
So that's what I wanted to show you. So transforming data we talked about bringing it in from Data.World, transforming data to sort of add tables or manipulate the data that's already in there. We talked about relationships and relating the tables together. We talked about some of the commonly used visuals, which there's like 5 that are the most commonly used. We talked about some of the visualization settings and how you can, you know, make these charts and graphs prettier. And we talked about functions that you can write, expressions, calculated measures that you can write, that you can then use in those visuals.
Right. So can you use the relationship manager to also have because you said that each page will kind of relationship itself, but what about across pages?
So these data tables, the calculations, all that stuff, and the relationships, that's all for the entire file.
Okay.
The only thing that's on one page is like if a user is interacting with the page. So
Right.
if I'm clicking here or I'm clicking on a slicer, that is specific to one page.
Looks cool. I don't really have any questions. It makes sense to me.
Yeah, cool. What should we do next?
Drink. No. Um, well, I'd like the opportunity to kind of apply what, we kind of talked about today and see what I can kind of come up with solo. Um, and then depending on how I do, if I have questions about that process, or I don't know. Yeah, or if there were functions that I wanted to use that we didn't go over, how I found out how to use them, or if I still had questions about it or something like that, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you're welcome to use this data set. Like I said, I'll link it in the comments in case anybody's watching and wants to use something similar. You can
Find the
also
link
look at,
below.
you can like and subscribe. You can, you could also, what can you do? You can look at Data.World and see if there's anything else
Yeah.
more interesting and less morbid than COVID stats. Like I said, I think it's helpful to, as you're learning, to use data set you're familiar with. And I think most people have seen these types of graphs and they're like, okay, I can see what this is, and it looks like the Google graph, and therefore I'm on the right track. So
yeah, I think too, I would like to try the connecting of Data.World into, so I will probably look at the link below and do that.
All right. Thanks again
Thanks.
for doing episode 3 and for being funny as always. So
I try.
good luck.
Thank you.
Happy reporting.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye.